Good day, everyone. Today I am going to discuss reflective practice in teaching, action research, and portfolio development, presentation, and submission, specifically portfolio consolidation. Here's our learning objectives. Explain the meaning, purpose, and process of portfolio consolidation in documenting learning and professional growth. Organize relevant portfolio artifacts into a clear and meaningful consolidated portfolio. Appreciate portfolio consolidation as a reflective practice that highlights learning, professional development, strengths, and areas for improvement. Now let us start with a basic question. What is teaching portfolio? A teaching portfolio is a collection of different forms of evidence that show a teacher's work, learning experiences, and professional development. For example, a teaching portfolio may contain lesson plans, teaching activities, assessment, reflections, feedbacks, and other professional outputs. But there is something important that we need to understand. A portfolio is not valuable simply because it contains many documents. Imagine that you have a folder containing 50 different activities, but everything is mixed together and there is no clear organization. It would be difficult for someone to understand what you learn from those activities. That is why the material becomes more useful when they are properly selected, organized, and connected. So, a teaching portfolio does not simply show what you did. It should also help show what you learn and how you develop. Portfolio consolidated define the process of bringing together relevant portfolio materials, selecting meaningful evidence, organizing the contents, and connecting related artifacts. In simple words, consolidation means putting separate pieces of work together in a meaningful way. However, we should remember that consolidation is not simply collecting documents. For example, if I put all my lesson plans, activities, reflections, and assessment papers inside one folder, I have collected them, but I have not necessarily consolidated them. In consolidation, I need to make decisions. I need to ask, which materials are relevant? What does this artifact show? How this connected to my learning or development? So, consolidation requires us to think about the meaning and purpose of each piece of evidence. Here's a simple example. Let us make this easier to understand. Imagine that you have completed many activities during your field study. So, without consolidation, you simply place all completed activities in one folder. There are lesson plans, feedback forms, reflections, and other documents, but they are not arranged or connected. Now, with consolidation, we follow a clearer process: work, evidence, reflections, improvement. For example, I created a lesson plan. That lesson plan becomes my work. My observers' feedback can serve as evidence of how I perform. Then, I write a reflection about what I learned from that experience. Finally, I revise my lesson plan based on the feedback showing improvement. So instead of simply showing the documents, the portfolio tells a story of learning and growth. Now that we understand the basic idea of consolidation, let us clarify some important terms that we will encounter throughout the discussion. We have key terms. The first is portfolio. A portfolio is a purposeful collection of selected work that demonstrates a learner knowledge, skills, and progress, achievements, and development. What is the word purposeful? This means that the material inside the portfolio are selected for a reason. For example, as a pre-service teacher, my portfolio may contain lesson plans, assessment tools, teaching outputs, reflections, and also feedback. These materials can help show how I am developing my skills as a future teacher. So, a portfolio is not just a collection of everything we have done. It is a carefully selected collection that shows our development. Next is artifact. An artifact is a completed work or product that serves as evidence of a learner's performance or learning. In simple terms, an artifact is something that we created or completed that can show what we have learned or accomplished. Examples include lesson plans, reflection papers, assessment activities, teaching materials, and observation forms. For example, if I created a lesson plan for my teaching demonstration, that lesson plan can become an artifact in my portfolio. But remember, an artifact become more meaningful when we are explained what it shows about our learning or development. Another important term is evidence. Evidence is an article or information that supports what a learner claims to have learned or achieved. For example, I say, my teaching improved. That is a claim. But if I want to prove that my teaching improved, I need evidence. I can show my earlier teaching plan, the feedback from my observer, and my revised teaching plan. Selection. Selection means choosing the artifacts that are most relevant to the purpose of the portfolio. This means we do not have to include everything single documents we have. We should choose the materials that prove meaningful evidence. Next is organization. Organization means arranging the selected artifacts in a clear and logical order. For example, teaching plans, teaching evidence, feedback, reflection, and revised work. Consolidation means turning separate portfolio materials into a meaningful and organized whole. Let us use a simple example. Suppose I have 4 separate materials. First, my lesson plan. Second, my teaching demonstration. Third, the feedback I receive. And fourth, my reflection. If these documents are simply placed together, they are just separate materials. But when I connect them to show planning, teaching, feedback, reflection, improvement, they become a consolidated set of evidence. Now that we understand what consolidation means, let us ask, why do we need to consolidate? So there are several purposes. First, it organizes evidence of learning and professional development. Instead of having scattered documents, our evidence is arranged in a clear way. Second, it selects relevant artifacts instead of including unnecessary materials. Third, it shows development by connecting earlier and later work. Fourth, it supports reflection on experiences, strengths, and areas for improvements. Fifth, it provides evidence of teaching competencies. And finally, it creates a coherent portfolio that can be clearly presented and evaluated. Now that we know why consolidated is important, let us look at how we actually do it. The consolidation process has 6 important steps: collect, select, organize, connect, review, and finalize. First is collect. It means gathering completed materials related to portfolio requirements. One step is select. After collecting our materials, we need to choose the artifacts that provide the strongest and most relevant evidence. Third is organize. Once we have selected our artifacts, we arrange them chronologically by topic, by competency, or according to the requirements of the portfolio. Next, we have connect. This is a very important part of the consolidation. We need to show the relationship between our selected artifacts. Next, we have review. Before finalizing the portfolio, we need to check everything. We check the completeness, organization, grammar, formatting, citations, references, and also the page numbers. We should also check if all required materials are included. The last step is finalize. After collecting, selecting, organizing, connecting, and reviewing our materials, we prepare the complete portfolio for presentation and submission. Qualities of a good consolidated portfolio. Now the question is, what makes a consolidated portfolio being good? There are several qualities we need to consider. First is relevance. The contents should directly support the purpose and requirements of the portfolio. Second is organization. The artifact should follow a clear and logical sequence. Third, coherence. This means that the artifact should be connected and should contribute to one clear picture of our development. Fourth is reflection. The portfolio should explain what we learned from our experiences. Next is completeness. This means that all required and essential evidence should be completed. Next one is accuracy. The information, documentation, citation, and references should be correct. Another is meaningful evidence. Each artifact should demonstrate specific learning outcome or professional growth. And lastly, the portfolio should be professional. The final presentation should be clear, readable, and consistent. To conclude our discussion, portfolio consolidation transforms separate materials into a purposeful and organized collection of evidence. The important thing to remember is that a good portfolio is not about having the most document. Its value depends on the relevance, quality, and meaning of the evidence being presented. A portfolio should not simply show, "Here are all activities I completed." Instead, it should communicate, Here is what I did. Here is the evidence. Here is what I learned, and here is how I improved. That is the real purpose of portfolio consolidation. So the key insights that we should remember is a good portfolio shows the learning and growth behind the work, not just the work completed. That concludes my discussion. Here's the references. Thank you and have a nice day everyone.